Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
You know, we've been having some unusual weather. I don't know about you guys, but it is unusually hot right now.
I don't disagree. It got super hot. In fact, I had somewhat of, this is totally, I don't know why we talk. So I walked down to my basement and, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. I wanted to go to sleep. That's really where this story starts. I climbed into my bed and I wanted to go to sleep. And I lay down and I'm like, it's hot in here. And I look over and the thermostat set to 68, but the current temperature was showing 75. Now, you don't have to be an HVAC technician to know, well, so that ain't right. So I go downstairs, Steve, to where my air conditioner unit is located, and I notice that around where the Freon, I guess it's not Freon anymore, but whatever, the coolant thing coming out is a small little ring of ice. So I think to myself, for making ice, that's probably not great. So I grab my handy-dandy Lutz 6-in-1 screwdriver from Lumber Mart, and I take apart the air conditioner to get inside of it. And the only way I can describe this to you, Steve, is like 3 inches of ice on the top of the fins and 3 inches of ice on the bottom of the fins. And I sit there and I look at it for a hot second. And now, mind you, it's 11-something at night. I've got a busy week. The last thing I want to do is fix my air conditioner. But as I previously mentioned, the temperature is rising, it's only going up, and it's already uncomfortable, and I want to sleep. So I think to myself, Self, you better get to work. So I grab the heat gun, and there I go, one layer at a time, melting. And of course, the condensation hose that drains all of the water that collects in the air conditioner that's supposed to drain into the floor drain is frozen and plugged up. So where do you think all that water went? Yeah, that's right on the floor, all over the place. So about 10 minutes into this, I'm kneeling in a puddle, and my socks are wet and my pants are wet. And so now I'm doing this half naked, and I got it fixed. It was fine. I defrosted the whole thing, got everything put back together, turned it back on, house cooled down. Only took about 40 minutes after the thing ran. But yes, suffice to say, yes, I've noticed it's unseasonably hot, and yes, it's causing problems. In fact, actually, really, the problem isn't entirely solved, because now there's that condensation hose is leaking a lot bit actually. And so there's, you'll be proud of me. I didn't fix the problem. I just took towels and I laid them in like a path-like fashion from the air conditioner over to the floor drain. And now I've got like a little channel. There's a little river in my basement that flows into the floor drain until the heating and air conditioning guys can come over and fix it properly, because I'm done. It works. It cools the house. And that was my fix for the night. And now the air conditioning guys can take it from there. But yes, it's a really long-winded, as you can tell, you stumbled into an emotional reaction. But I've noticed it's unseasonably hot.
Well, it sounds like you solved that the way that I probably would. Like, So I come from a family like my dad. My dad does amazing work at whatever he does. Mm-hmm. He is slow and methodical and perfectionist. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, good enough. It is functioning.
Get her done. Yeah, here's the thing. I'll be honest with you. There are some things, like I don't touch plumbing at all. Like at all. I'm just not. I replaced the wax seal on my toilet one time, and that was all the do-it-yourself I had to do for plumbing to be like, nope, this is not a Noah thing. This is definitely this is just not my thing, right? Electrical, I'm way good with. Like general construction, framing walls. I'm getting better and better at doing mudding and taping and stuff. That kind of stuff, sure. And then when you dig into like troubleshooting refrigerators, stoves, ovens, air conditioner, I'm willing to do it. Like, I don't mind it. I prefer not to do it in the middle of the night. I prefer not to do it in the middle of the night while I'm kneeling in water. I prefer not to do it in the middle of the night while I'm kneeling in water and I'm half naked. But there is a challenge, right? There is a like, oh, how does this thing work? And so there's there's a level of interest that I get out of it. It just I hit my like you. It's like, well, it works right now, and that's really the extent to which I'm going to troubleshoot it. And I do think, when they put it in originally, they took, the best way I can describe this, they took a plastic tube and ran it from the air conditioner like right across the center of the floor and into the floor drain. And there's the kitchen stack that drains the kitchen that's over on the corner of the room. And so I think I'm going to ask the heating and air conditioning guys, hey, what would it take for a guy to run like PVC pipe? I know you're going to have to trace the perimeter of the room, but why don't you go ahead and do that? And then drain all of this into that floor stack instead of going into the floor drain that has the little backstop thing that plugs up and then the water backs up. So I'm trying to say, Steve, that on the other side of this, it's going to be better. But right now, I can't wait for our North Dakota winters. By the way, here's a nice segue into actual tech. XL Energy, which is the company that both, and I guess we share internet. We don't necessarily share power.
No, we share power.
We do. Okay. So they made an announcement that they're going to go up 28% next year, or maybe 18%. I don't know, a lot. And so one of the things that was asked to the CEO is that because of all these AI data centers that are popping up? And he said it's too early to tell. And here's my question for you. If you build an AI data center that is a place where the average temperature is, it gets down to 40 below zero for some months of the year, and 8 months it's nice and cold, does that lower the cooling costs? And if it lowers the cooling costs, does that mean that it's more cost efficient to operate a data center in cooler places than it is in like hot desert places?
I would say generally no, because the only reason, so to some extent, but if you think about this logically, the only reason why putting it in North Dakota would save you some power as opposed to Kansas in terms of cooling is if you had really shoddy insulation, right? Like if you stuck it in the desert, sure, everything has to work harder because the sun is really beating down on it. But there isn't going to be a huge impact on the cooling of the building because the heat is being produced largely in these northern climates. It's going to be produced from inside the building. And unless you are actively somehow using the outside cooling, and some places do that, but unless you're actively using the outside to cool you during those times of the year, then it's still going to be the same because you're generating the same heat.
Okay, here's my second question. My second question is, how typical wisdom says that mining cryptocurrency is really good for power companies and really good for power consumers because you want to choose when you want to buy energy from the power company. But mining, for example, is able to accommodate. So that is to say, I want to wake up at 7 a.m. and I want to use a whole bunch of power while I'm getting ready for work. Then I don't want to use any power during the day. And then I want to get home and I want to use a bunch of power again. The power company hates that because how is a power company run? Steam. What happens to steam when you slow it down? You get water and condensation. And then you got to shut the whole thing down. You got to clean all the water out so it doesn't corrode. So power companies hate that. They want to spin up and they want to run at one consistent level all the way through. And so cryptocurrency has largely been a great ally to this because it means in the morning when you want to use the power, cryptocurrency miners shut down a little bit and let you use the power to get ready for work and shave and all the things. And then when you go to work and you don't need that power, they're willing to immediately purchase it and start mining. And then when you get home from work, they can shut back down. Is AI being a consistent use of power? Do you think that makes for a good ally too, or does it just increase the power for everybody because it's just more draw on the grid?
Because it's likely to actually continue to add to it because people's peak time. So I guess it depends on the usage patterns. But if you just think in general, while people are at work, they're going to be using it. But when they get home, they're going to be using it as well. And I think that given the fact that they don't serve regionally, the difference between the power and the crypto miners is they're based regionally. And they will scale up and down regionally. Like you shove an AI center in Sioux Falls, it will serve the entire world more or less because that's where they've jammed the stuff in. And so it doesn't matter that Sioux Falls is on off peak right now and people are not using it. The usage patterns are depend on the people around the world to tap into that.
Here's $1 million idea for you. Ready for this? You could start the frigid oven. You could start a data center called the Frigid Oven.
You're terrible.
And you put it in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and just that's the whole thing. You put your cooling fins outside, and you have valves so you can shut it off. So in the summer, you shut the valves off, and then you just use normal liquid cooling. And then in the summer, you send the ethylene glycol or whatever it is they use, glycol water mixture or whatever, outside, and just have like big, huge radiator type things that cool the liquid down, and you absolutely bring the outside frigid air, and then we can stop complaining about the weather and being like, yeah, it makes us tons of money.
Well, I mean, when it's cold, I don't think either one of us particularly complain about that.
That's true.
Only when it's above like 80 degrees.
That's true. You know why that is? Because you can put more clothing and blankets and all the things on. You can only take so much off before it gets weird.
Speaking of weird, should we do some news?
Carton is the KDE in progress virtual machine manager. It continues to move forward with several new updates as of August 2025. For the uninitiated, the project is still not feature complete, but aims to deliver a Qt native alternative to the GTK-based tools widely adopted among Linux users, such as GNOME, Boxes, and Virt Manager. So, Steve, I know without even asking that Virt Manager has a special place in your heart, as it does mine. For somebody who isn't familiar with Virt Manager, what is it?
It's kind of like a centralized, well, you can use it to control VMs locally, but the way that I use it is it can make remote connections to other hosts and help you control KVM that way.
Over SSH, right?
It can do several things, but yeah, SSH is the primary way.
So the thing I think that is so unbelievably cool about this, or what really blew my mind initially, is, you can set up your virtual host on whatever it is you like. And the thing that I feel like escapes a lot of people, they go with one particular brand or one particular flavor of Kool-Aid over the other. The thing that continually pulls me back into libvirt is there are a handful of packages that I have to install, and it can run on CentOS. It can run on Alma. It can run on Red Hat. It can run on Ubuntu. It can run on Arch. It doesn't matter. You pick a flavor of Linux distro, which, oh, by the by, can largely be dependent on what your underlying infrastructure is. So, for example, you've got a tiny little Intel NUC, and it's got one little single drive, and I'm going to make something up here, 32 gigs of RAM, and you just don't have a lot of resources. You might install just a basic Red Hat system and have that running. But then you go up and you say, okay, well, now I'm going to scale it. And I'm going to put it into, a 7415, Dell R7415, a big, huge rack server. And I want it to have, 6 drives, and I want a different pool of this and a different pool of that. Well, now you can use Ubuntu, and you can set it up with ZFS, and you get snapshotting and all of the things, but the same exact tooling, the same exact skill set, the same exact thing that you used on your laptop, that you used on your own Intel NUC, now scales perfectly up to this big, large server. And Virt Manager, for years and years and years, was a graphical interface to allow you to interact with these things so you didn't have to drop to the command line and use Virsh. Although I would also argue that there's value in being able to drop to the command line and use Virsh. Well, about, what would you say, Steve, like 5, 6 years ago, somewhere in there?
It was a little while ago, yeah.
They deprecated Virt Manager in favor of Cockpit. Now, the argument for doing so, which I 100% agree with, by the way, the world is changing. And so people, especially system administrators, it's not sexy anymore to sit up with your ThinkPad, console in and I'm gonna type magical incantations into my keyboard and make things happen. Nobody wants to do it that way anymore. They want to pull their smart thing out of their pocket, and they want to tap on an app or tap on a thing, and they want to click on a thing and restart the server that way. And I understand it. I get it. I completely understand that. And so it is the way of the future. And so because of that, they are pushing people towards the concept of Cockpit, which I like for a whole bunch of reasons. It's modular. Again, like many of the advantages we just talked about libvirt, you can run it on any base system. It has a tremendous amount of modules. You've got companies like 45 Drives that are developing custom Cockpit modules to do all manner of custom things, storage and those sorts of things. So it's really a good solution. It's definitely the better mousetrap. I don't deny that. At the same time, Steve, I don't like change because change is different, and different is bad. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I'm still using Virt Manager, so
because it works. Something. It just continues to work. Although, and I feel like you and I have both stumbled into this, there are absolutely some things that are not that they don't work in Virt Manager, but it's a thing to get them to work. And bridging comes to mind. And with Cockpit, it's just you click the button and it's like magic. It just works.
Man, I have so many stories from just the last several months, last 6 months or so, where I fought with something and then black magic, when I went into Cockpit, it went click, click, and it was done. And like, I would really like to be able to trace this to figure out what the heck it did so that I can reverse this, figure out what I did wrong. Never could get to that. You
know what would be particularly cool, now that I'm thinking about it? It would be particularly cool and awesome if there was some way that a person could, like when you execute a command in Cockpit, it would tell you, like, here's the verse thing I'm doing underneath the hood to make this happen.
Yes.
That would 100%. Be really neat.
Yep.
So in any event, according to Derek Lin, Cartoon's lead developer, one of the most important changes in the cycle is the removal of the dependency for virt install. Instead, it now generates libvirt domain XML directory using libosinfo. That identifies the installation media and fills in the required configuration details such as UUID, MAC addresses, so on and so forth. Another big focus has been the move away from relying on Virt Viewer. In light of this, is a cartoon or carton? I suppose it's carton.
I think it's carton. It's just carton with a K because everything in KDE has to start with
Actually,
K.
this is occurring to me halfway through the segment, which is a little embarrassing, but carton, boxes, get it?
Yep.
Okay. Now it hit me. Carton includes its own Spice client and viewer built into Qt. It handles display rendering, input forwarding, audio streams, as well as support for full stream and basic resizing. However, performance and scalability still require a bit of improvement. For now, Carton is still considered experimental, but all signs indicate that things are moving in the right direction. Once everything is ready, KDE users will finally be able to move on from Virt Manager. Honestly, it'd be great to see more KDE devs back Lin's work, because Carton really has what it takes to becoming one of the key apps in the KDE ecosystem. So my takeaway here, Steve, if I was to give it to somebody in a 30-second elevator pitch, is if you were listening when we said libvirt is a really great way for you to start out on virtualization, if you were listening when we said, hey, there's an opportunity for you to use Cockpit to manage libvirt, and it's going to, to take your words, use black magic to do all of the things for you to just make it really easy. Now you have another native application that's going to be built into the KDE desktop that's going to allow you to leverage, build upon all of the same things you have been using and you have been managing in the past. It's a forward progression. And I think this is the real value of the concept of open source, in which everything does its own little domain really, really, really well. So libvirt just is doing the hypervisor. It's not doing everything else. It's not a drop-in solution. It doesn't do all of the fancy things. It just does virtualization. You want to do file system? You pick that out separately. You want to decide what front-end interface you want to do? You do that separately. And so there is, if you wish to do so, when you're installing, I think Ubuntu has this, I believe Red Hat has this, the little single checkbox thing to say, make this a virtual host, and it will automatically install the requisite Cockpit modules and that sort of thing. So you can just go to IP address : is it 9090, and get you into Cockpit, and you can manage it with Cockpit machines. All that exists, and you can absolutely do it that way. And it gives you that, appliance-like web-based control panel-like experience. But this also means that if you're a system administrator and you're already using KDE, now there's one more tool in your toolbox that's a native tool that can connect into the same technology, and you can kind of build upon that success. I think it's pretty cool. Also, Steve, talk to me about OpenShift. That's something you deal with day in and day out. And you actually were, I don't want to say leading the charge, but leading the charge towards containerizing KVM so that you could leverage it inside of OpenShift, which now the Red Hat announced this year became a project or a product now.
Yeah, so I want to be clear about this. This came from upstream KubeVirt, and it's just kind of a side note, kind of tacking on to the idea of Carton, which can connect into libvirt machines, and we were talking about how solid of a hypervisor libvirt actually is. Red Hat has a product called OpenShift Virtualization, and it is not based on, it is KVM. There's no two ways about it. And the way it works under the hood is essentially a container gets spun up with KVM in it, like the KVM hypervisor, and it will run your VM inside of the container. And so from your perspective, you're running a just bog standard QEMU file, QCOW2 file, and it's running on top of a cloud native interface. And so this is not to be like a corporate shill, but I have noticed so many really interesting things that you can do once you start combining I don't want to call KVM legacy, because that's not even fair. It's modern. It is what we've based the product on. But like the older style of working in the VMs with the newer style of making things declarative, such as like you can attach mount points into your VM through the Kubernetes interface. And like there's a bunch of stuff that you can do to make it a lot more flexible and things that had took some orchestration before. So like taking a golden image, this is a very common practice where you have like a base like OS install, and then you build on top of it because the company has put all of its standardized tooling in it and all that sort of stuff. And then to get it up to deploy whatever it was you wanted to deploy on, you'd have to have some layer of orchestration in terms of like adding your own config and all that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do with the Kubernetes native tooling that really helps to accelerate how you are deploying your VMs, such as like one of the things that you often had to do is, let's say that your company had just package a JBoss or a web server or whatever, and they built a golden image like this is the thing that you will use, and then you'll deploy your Java application or your web page or whatever on top of it. And you'd have to go in and you'd set up your proxy rules, and you'd set up like if you've got, Apache reverse proxy settings in there and all of those sorts of things. You do all that configuration. Well, when you start adopting a native tool set, you can take that golden image, but instead of you having to do anything about it, you can actually tell OpenShift, go get that out of Git and just inject it into the VM for me. And so there is a lot of flexibility. It brings a big amount of flexibility to VMs, which I want to say manual process. Mm-hmm. I understand that we have we've automated. We figured out how to automate that, whether it's kickstart files or whatever it was. We figured out how to make that work, but that is not the source control centralized automation that we talk about these days. Like everybody talks about GitOps and like you check in a thing and then something else happens. Like that still doesn't happen with VMs. You have to have an orchestrator like Jenkins or something there that's watching that. So it's just, it's an interesting thing that KVM has been around for so long. It's been such a stalwart. We're still building new tools. Like the KDE community is building this awesome tool, or it looks awesome. I haven't used it because they've declared it to still not be feature complete. Mm-hmm. I installed it and then went, it's not feature complete.
Yeah, and I'm going to manage my real VMs with it. Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not a knock against the project. It's more just that it needs time for me to let it mature. Like for some people, they'll adopt it. It'll be wonderful, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think it's interesting that this old stalwart that, like you said, you can install it on any Linux operating system and it will run your VMs for you. That thing is breathing new life into projects even as late as 2024 when we launched OpenShift virtualization. And
to be clear, just to underscore the part that you played in this, is you worked on the team that did a lot of the, would it be development?
What I'll say is that I put my fingers into like testing for it, right? Like I was not on the engineering team. I do not want to take any credit from anyone who actually did that work, right? Like I poked at it and provided I helped to provide that feedback loop of how things were working and that sort of stuff, like many Red Hatters, right? I'm not alone there.
So you and again, on a team of many, but poked your fingers into saying, hey, there is this huge problem in the industry right now, whereas there is a company that is raking people over the coals, and there's a way for us to address that concern. And you were part of the fingers that poked to help usher that into reality.
There are so many people I think that overstates my own importance. Like, there are so many people, because Red Hat is still a very open culture. Anyone who is remotely interested in this is more than welcome to go in and poke at things as they see them, right? So there are hundreds of people that go and poke at these things. So I really don't want to overstate the fact that, like, I went in there and maybe I filed some bugs and provided some like interface feedback and stuff like that. Like, that it's just a small part of the fact that there are so many people dedicating their time to making these things happen.
Sure. So go check it out. If you have feedback for us, we would love to hear it. You can send that in to live@asknoahshow.com. Speaking of stalwarts, Jonathan Riddle is leaving KDE. In a candid and rather emotional farewell blog post titled Adios Chicos, 25 Years of KDE, while reflecting on the success of projects like Kubuntu and KDE Neon, he also voiced disappointment over missed opportunity, fractured ties, and the struggles that marked his final years in the community. So he has a really great write-up at jriddle.org if you want to read it if you want to get the news from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Otherwise, Linux IAC has what I think is a pretty decent write-up. We'll have it linked to the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. But, effectively, he goes on to say that there were a number of things that happened. The first thing that happened was there was a lot of commercial interest in KDE, and he references some really big names, Google and a city in Germany, and of course Valve, who has standardized their Steam Deck on the KDE desktop, and talks about how much commercial viability there was for this particular desktop environment in Linux. And then what I thought was really interesting, which I wasn't aware of, is he was on the very early cusp of Ubuntu. He writes in his blog article, clearly this was a good way to make a career. I dossed around until the year the Quaker Geek Collective heard the tale of an African spaceman who was funding a new Linux distro called SSDS, Shuttleworth's super secret Debian startup. And I got into Debian packaging and made a point that KDE should be involved. And then he effectively outlines his career and the journey that he went on with KDE Plasma, and talks about some of the success that they had and how Nokia wanted to use it and sell it alongside some of their phones. And, and then he does a great job, I think, at drawing the parallels of this thing was taking off. It was really good. Nokia had interest in it. And then Apple and iPhone came along and it went down. And the city of Munich and Weta Digital, and just a really, really great walkthrough of all of the places that leverage KDE. He walks through the commercial side of it, how things went with Canonical and then Blue Systems. And then lastly, he ends with a rather, I guess, from his point of view, disappointing note that Tech Paladin, who is the company that is now taking over the contracts for KDE, he didn't share their vision of how things should be done. And he, I think, had some very different ideas of how to structure a business, and he had some very different ideas of how to structure profits. And I think he had some very different priorities by way of where he thought money should be spent and on what things and with what value system. And when he was unsuccessful at convincing other people that were involved to adopt those values and adopt that mentality and forge that path, he said that it was time for him to step away. And I think that whether or not you use KDE, you need to acknowledge that Jonathan Riddle is an amazing human being who has done some incredible work over 25 years. And even the stuff that was designed for KDE ends up getting used in all manner of different things and provided a ecosystem for places like Carton to land. And so I would tell you that, I've moved away from using traditional desktop environments. These days, I'm primarily using tiling window managers. And when I do spin something up, frankly, I'm using GNOME, not because I have any particular love for it but just because it is the de facto standard in many, many distros. And there's also a lot of things that have been forked from GNOME. So Endless OS comes to mind, right? It's not GNOME stock, but it's very GNOME-esque. And Tails obviously, uses GNOME by default. So when I'm in a desktop environment, I'm not using KDE a whole lot. However, I would tell you that the standard issue at Altispeed Technologies is still a Kubuntu desktop. From the day that we started issuing laptops through today, we still install them with Kubuntu and still really like it. We give people the freedom to install whatever distro they like. And so our operations manager, he's a Fedora guy lately and running it. And we 100% support him or anybody else using whatever distro you like. But KDE has been that consistent interface that whether you're on Fedora, whether you're on Arch, whether you're on an Ubuntu base, it provides a really nice professional desktop environment that is Windows-esque, right? And so if you come from the Windows world and you're used to a certain flow of things, it's going to land with you and it's going to make a lot of sense. And so we wish Jonathan the best. Sad to see him leave, but really appreciate all of the things that he's done and the path that he forged to make things like Carton possible.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of September 14th, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. FreeType 2.14 is out. Curl 8.16 is now available. Samba 4.23 has been released. Hyperland 0.51 is now available. MKV Toolnix version 95 is out. Godot 4.5 is available. And in distro news, Q4OS 6.1 has been released. Puppy Linux Bookworm Pup 10.0.12 is out and is based on Debian 12.12. In open source hardware news, the Spec 5 Strike is a handheld Linux workstation with an integrated LoRa mesh networking. Built on the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 and a custom Spec 5 carrier board, it targets developers, makers, hackers, and off-grid communicators by combining Linux computing, wireless connectivity, and portability. In open source security news, Yuri ransomware exploits open source tools, raising double extortion risks. Cybersecurity researchers have discovered 2 new malware families, including a modular Apple macOS backdoor called ChiliHell and a Go-based remote access Trojan named XynorRat that can target both Linux and Windows systems. And open source ransomware tools on GitHubs are fueling an AI-driven cybercrime surge. In other AI news, the Open Source Initiative's executive director has departed, leaving questions about what will happen in the OS artificial intelligence definition debate. New open source Qwen 3 Next models are previewing a hybrid MOE architecture delivering improved accuracy and accelerated parallel processing. UAE's K2 Think challenges OpenAI with the world's fastest open source AI model. Rust GPT is an open source pure Rust implementation of a transformer-based large language model built from scratch, emphasizing performance and transparency without high-level libraries. It serves as an educational tool amid rising Rust adoption in AI, highlighted by industry shifts like OpenAI's tooling. Google has released Vault Gemma, a differentially private LLM. Differential privacy offers a mathematically sound solution by adding calibrated noise to prevent memorization. Google has unveiled an open source protocol for AI payments with stablecoin support. And lastly, Mozilla has decided to phase out its 32-bit release for Linux.
It's called QWhisper, and it's put out by our very own Q5sys. It's a Qt6-based desktop application that provides real-time speech-to-text functionality using OpenAI's Whisper model. It offers a user-friendly graphical interface for continuous audio transcription with support for multiple outputs and formats advanced for processing. So, Steve, I guess my first question is, did you hear of, or were you ever a fan of Dragon Naturally Speaking?
My dad used that for the bank early on. I remember seeing that in, I want to say 94-ish, like early on. And then he bought subsequent copies of it as he found it useful for his work.
So my dad also used it. He used it for medical transcription. But let me tell you, back in the day, it was the bee's knees from the standpoint that they had other speech recognition stuff. The problem is it sucked, right? And so, and particularly if you used any sort of special vernacular, and your dad was accounting, right?
Yep.
So I assume this applies to him too. There's just going to be words that are going to come up in industry specific things that don't exist for the rest of the normal speaking world. And Dragon was one of those softwares that was able to handle that and train for it. Now, the advantage of QWhisper is a couple of things. First of all, it's leveraging AI, so there really isn't a whole lot of training. It doesn't have to learn your voice. But the other part of it is that it is using everything local. And so you're able to install this and run it on a local machine and have it dictate and transcribe for you everything you're saying or everything you're doing. Now, if I remember right, Steve, Whisper is what you were using to do your notes, right?
Yep. It's what I use to do the transcription when I, for example, do an audio recording. Like when I run a D&D session, I often record it so that I don't have to worry about taking notes while I'm also running the session.
Would something like this, I assume that's some sort of web front end right now, right?
It is.
Would something like this ever appeal to you where you could have like a little laptop and everything is done right there on the laptop and you walk out of the room with the transcription sort of a thing?
Somewhat, except that it gives me a unified place to go back to. So like because I am using a back-end service, when I do the transcription, all of my transcriptions are still sitting on that VM that I have doing that thing so that I can access them from, like, I tend to bring a laptop with me to do these sessions, whereas I like to do my actual notes and my session prep on my desktop with all the monitors. And so it's one of those, it's an easy transfer of files if I have a centralized place to get them from.
If it's on the oven cloud, so to speak.
Well, I mean, I suppose you could also use this with Nextcloud or SyncThing or anything like that. And so that could be a solved problem. I guess at the end of the day, I might give it a shot.
That'd be interesting. So if you have a need for transcription, highly recommend you check this project out. I have a few clients that are still using various different softwares to do transcription, and they have a few of them have tried various different cloud things, which, largely my attitude to them has been, well, if it works, great, but don't come knocking on my door if it doesn't, because go talk to the cloud person. So this will be the first thing that I can really point them to say, hey, here's a local thing you can install and run on a machine. Now, presumably, the more beefy machine that you have, the better experience you're going to have. But also, presumably, because you're not doing heavy image stuff, I would think that you could get away without having, a beast of a computer, yeah?
Yeah. So the way that I have noticed it working is if I transcribe off of the GPU, it is about a third of the time. So like if I throw a 3-hour thing, it takes an hour to process it, give or take. Mm-hmm. If I do it off the CPU, it's probably about a 1-to-1. So I could see why this QWhisper would be able to do real time.
You can check it out, github.com/q5/QWhisper. And of course, we'll have a link for you in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. California's legislature this week approved a bill to let renters opt out of bulk billing arrangements that force them to pay for internet services from a specific carrier. The bill says that on January 1st, a landlord must allow the tenant to opt out of paying for any subscription from a third-party internet service provider, such as through bulk billing agreement to provide service for wired internet, cellular, or satellite service that's offered in conjunction with the tenancy. If a landlord fails to do that, the tenant is able to deduct the cost of the subscription to the third-party internet service from the rent, and the landlord would be prohibited from retaliating. In other words, they can't kick him out. So, Steve, you have some firsthand experience with the concept of these bulk tenant billing. Tell me about that.
So where I was in Canada, and I understand that this is pretty normal in Canada just in general, when a service provider comes to the building and they make an agreement with the building also then prohibits other providers from coming in and laying the same infrastructure. So in my area, and most areas, to be honest with you, most areas use Bell will get there first, and they lay down their fiber or whatever it is that they run to the building. And the company that ran fiber as a competitor, in the 7 years that I was in that apartment, I contacted them weekly at first, and then I dropped to monthly, and the answer was always the same. The building won't talk to us. We can't lay in the fiber. Like, we're just not allowed to lay fiber in your building. So I fell back to DSL because DSL is just a phone line, and if your provider provides DSL over a phone line, there isn't any way for your tower to really stop them from being able to turn on DSL. So instead of having fiber, I had 15 meg DSL because I am not a fan of that service from that company.
So in the end, what I'm hearing you say is that you didn't believe you were going to get superior service at a superior rate.
I am not a fan of supporting that particular company. And so regardless of whether I was going to get superior quality, which arguably going from 15 meg DSL to fiber, even though it was like 250 meg at the time, that would have been a huge jump. And arguably it would have been better. But I was just not going to pay this company any money because of previous engagements that I've had with them. And I'm speaking personally. I'm not speaking about on a professional level.
Yep.
I just prefer not to do business with them.
So when you see, so the problem in your case was the provider laid the infrastructure and then they made it impossible for anybody else to lay the infrastructure. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yep.
So in this case, what they're effectively doing, and I thought this was really interesting, right? The bill passed the state Senate in a 30-7 vote on Wednesday. It needs Governor Gavin Newsom's signature to become law. But it was approved by the state assembly 75-0. That tells me that this is wildly popular in the state of California. And the thing that I thought was particularly interesting was their attitude was, you just need to treat people fairly. So the lobbying groups that came back said that bulk billing reduces internet prices, to which their answer was, if that's true, great, this bill doesn't do diddly squat to harm you. If you're actually able to provide a customer a better experience at a lower price, you have nothing to worry about, my friend, because it's included in the rent. They're not stopping you from doing that. It's passed on to the tenant. They're not stopping you from doing that. It's a bulk signed agreement. They're not stopping you from doing that. The one and only time that you run into any friction whatsoever is if a customer says, for one reason or another, I don't want to support this company. You're able to withdraw those funds from that bulk billing agreement and go spend it how you want to. And I thought that was really interesting. They said this is kind of like a first step in trying to give this industry an opportunity to just treat people fairly. It's not super restrictive. We're not banning bulk billing. We're not even limiting how much money people can make. We're simply saying that with this bill, if a tenant wants to opt out of the arrangement, they should be allowed to do so. So me, as a maximum absence of coercion guy, I think this is the best of both lines, right? If you're on the hook and you're getting good connection from your ISP and the ISP is treating you fairly and they have decent business practices that cause you to want to continue to support them, well, you'll just go with the flow and things will be fine. If and only if they have poor business practices and they develop a Steve and say, oh, I will not support that company because of X, Y, or Z, if it ends up being more expensive than what they could get elsewhere. So they just have to be confident that they're going to provide the best possible thing at the best possible price. And they go in to say, we could have made a stricter bill, right? We could have made a bill that told landlords you can't charge the customer more than you're paying. We could have put a cap on the amount that we're able to charge. She said there's so many things that we could have done that would have been a lot less business friendly, but the goal wasn't to harm business. The goal was to help people. So all they're doing is drawing some lines in the sand to say that if you're going to sign an agreement for everybody, in other words, and if I was to say this in slightly different language, if you as the owner of a building are going to decide for everybody within the building what internet they're going to subscribe to, you better make sure that it's the best possible product at the lowest possible price. I think that seems exceedingly fair. Do you agree or disagree with that?
There's very rare times where I look at what comes out of California and I think that it's something that should be examined. But in this case, like you, I tend to be the maximum freedom choice, even if that is suboptimal in the outcome, right? And in this case, I think that I never have been a big fan of the fact that somebody who owns the building just decides that if you want to live here, this is the service that you like. This is the cable provider you're going to have, or this is the internet provider you're going to have. I think that is silly. I understand that there's some level of they own the building, but this is also not. This is not the same thing as like a private business. This is where someone is living and will presumably live for a good chunk of their life. And that's in today's society, I think that internet choice is crucial. It is, for us, it is a human right to have the best that we can get for the money or at least the choice. It's a human right to have the choice, because so much of the government requires us to interact with them via the internet that it really is not optional to have internet access.
Talk to me a little bit about where you think we're going as far as internet access. So you used the term human right, which I thought was really interesting. To a degree, there's some things that I think kind of divide us, and I'm not sure that we would all ever get on the same page. I feel like if you walked into a room and told people, hey, it's 2025, the internet, it's like running water, right? These days, you want to apply for a job, you want to take advantage of government services, you want to, for crying out loud, you want to buy a ticket to a concert. You need the internet. You need it. It's not an option anymore. And so we want to sign a bill, do a thing, pass it, whatever that says, hey, cities, states, federal government, whatever, is going to lay all of the infrastructure, and then we'll go back to common carrier, in which any ISP or any organization can take over that line and actually provide the service. But instead, I am in the weird situation right now where there's an ISP called Blue Peak that just came into our city. And so I'm watching them go block by block and tear up all of the berms as they're snaking fiber right next to the existing fiber that Midco has in there. Right. And there's a part of me that's like, you got to be kidding. So like every ISP that's going to come to offer competing services now, this is what we're going to do. We're all going to lay competing infrastructure all right next to each other. And we're going to maintain three of the exact same thing all the way around the city. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why wouldn't you have one thing and then let individuals lease it? And I'm not saying you can go back and change it. I understand it. If an ISP paid to lay it, it's theirs. I get that. So I'm not suggesting we go back and change that. But I am suggesting this might be the one thing we could all agree on. If we said, hey, do we want to pass a thing saying this is a human right and everybody should have access to it? I feel like that could be something that would go forward.
That really surprises me. As a business owner, you are essentially advocating for putting your entire business in the hands of someone else.
Isn't that crazy? Or in the hands of government, which is even more strange for me to say. But
like you literally are giving up control over your own fate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I am. And to a degree, I guess part of it, Steve, is this only applies to the internet, right? Because for me, and again, correct me where you see the error in my logic here, but to a degree, the internet's only valuable when it's interconnected with everybody else anyway. So there really isn't any value in like my network, right? So like, let's say we bury all the fiber and my network is solid. Well, if my uplink goes down, great, all the stuff in my city will work, but it can't talk to anybody else. So it's not really all that helpful to my customers. So to a degree, it's dependent on everybody else anyway. To me, it's kind of like calling a thing and saying, all right, well, if that's the case, and we all acknowledge that fiber is the way that we want to do this, we all acknowledge that doing the same work 2, 3, 4 times so that it can all be laid next to each other seems like redundant work. Maybe in this case, it does make sense to go back to a model in which the infrastructure itself is owned by the city or the state or however it is you want to frame it out. But in the same way that I don't own the telephone poles, in the same way I don't own the power poles, you put in, the city puts in like the base ground infrastructure, and then companies can use it and attach into it. Maybe I'm off base here, but.
So have you ever lived under that model?
No.
So as someone who has, so in Canada, Bell came in and laid all the phone line and stuff like that, and they were subsidized by the government and got good returns on that subsidy. They also were able to successfully lobby the government to pass a law that said that in markets, especially small markets, is against the law to duplicate infrastructure, which meant if they laid the phone line, nobody else can lay the phone line, which also meant that so Bell owned the phone line, and they also were the predominant DSL provider at the time where that was the most important thing. And even if you chose to have a secondary provider, which many of us did out of either
Necessity?
stubbornness or thought we would get the better deal or whatever, I personally can point to multiple dozens of times where I called the ISP for a problem and they have to shrug and say, well, we're riding on Bell's line and they've applied this QoS. Or so, for example, my company, like the company that I was with, would let you run email out of your house. However, it's Bell's line, and Bell was like, no, you can't do that. There was also times where Bell was caught throttling World of Warcraft updates because they felt that was just taking too much. So one of the smaller ISPs actually won a lawsuit against them because they were doing QoS and specifically limiting that type of traffic, which was giving. I was on that ISP. It was giving us a worse experience because Bell was like, nah, we're just going to QoS those little guys. What are they going to do about it?
Would it change it all for you if it was a thing of like, the entity who lays the infrastructure can't dictate what happens to it afterwards? Like, there's a piece of fiber that goes from Noah's house to, some sort of demarcation point. I don't know, a building, a tower or whatever. And so whatever company I ask to provide the service to my house, they take over that line. Would that change it for you at all? Or you say the basic premise is flawed?
Well, that's like saying, okay, you lived under an oppressive government. Let's make a little tweak here. And they super duper pinky promise not to do that bad thing anymore. Would that make you feel better under living under this this oppressive government?
When you frame it like that, no. But and again, this is why I think you're the perfect person to help navigate this discussion a little bit, because to your point, I haven't lived it. I've had my entire life the same ISP that you have today. Midco has been my ISP my whole life. Before I had cable internet, my dad had dial-up access through the University of North Dakota, and that's what I was the first ISP that we had that was persistent was Midco, and came to me via a little like shark fin looking modem in our house. And I've stuck with them ever since, and I've had excellent customer service. I've never felt they don't do any data caps. I've never had a bad experience. I don't really have anything bad to say. So to a degree, I'm a man with an opinion, and I'm never going to be at the mercy of a man with experience.
I'm just surprised overall that as a business owner, you would consider giving up the literal heart of your business.
Yeah. Yeah, especially as a network company. That's probably a mistake to say out loud, wasn't it? The music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. Hey, all the articles, everything we talk about, and more, because we don't get to everything that we plan to talk about. There's just too much stuff. It's all available for you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. You can go all the way back to episode 1 and listen from the beginning if you want to. We air every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at asknoahshow.com. Join us live.